high quality picture. This sampler was scanned as part of the microfilm of her father's pension file. It's sitting in the National Archives, the way that a letter or another type of document would. And this was work done by Martha Earle, submitted on behalf of her mother for her father's pension. Yeah.
Is that cross stitch?
Yeah, so it's embroidery, yeah. So this would look beautiful on a wall because it has families' names and dates, was submitted as evidence of family connection. The way that if you were to be pulled over today, you'd pull out a driver's license. Or if you needed to renew your license, you'd have documents proving who you are and those types of things. When we started to kind of put together, well, how are we gonna make this hyper-local? How are we going to talk about the revolution in Upton, Blackstone, and Millville, and everywhere that we're invited? Often there's a secondary source. There's a book that we can start with. And we didn't find that anyone had written about this whole area and the revolution. So we figured we'll have to find it. And one of the ways that we did that was we started researching as many patriots or people who served as we could find. And a very easy way to do that is through military records and those pension records that we're going to be looking at tonight. The quick and short reason why we stopped just doing that is the metadata is not very good. If you're interested in who served past the Civil War in a major American military campaign, the metadata is good on websites like Ancestry and Fold3, which is their military arm. What that means is you can filter by town, you can search by town, by name, and the data returned is good, it's accurate. That doesn't exist with these because we're effectively talking about 80,000 TIFF files, very high quality photo files. No one knows what they say. They're just labeled under one person. We don't have that data. So we looked at town histories, we talked to lots of people, we found burial grounds that had American flags and American Revolution insignia next to them. And that's how we started putting this together. And if you're interested in learning about Revolutionary War history where you are, if you want new information or you want to do that research yourself, a lot of it actually happens this way. If you want to learn about John Adams, the destruction of the tea, what happened in Philadelphia, there's entire libraries about that. If you care about the Blackstone Valley, we are still finding that story. That story is not very neatly told in lots of places. One thing to look for is going to be a Sons of the American Revolution placard, like what you see there next to a grave. We also just tried to find landmarks literally in the woods. We spent a lot of time exploring, trying to find things that we read about in books. Some of them we found, and some of them we didn't. There's no trace of them left today. If you ever see a ranger lost in the woods, maybe that's or they're actually just lost. I'll give you a few examples of stories that we ended up tracking and how we did it. In North Smithfield, Rhode Island, we were asked to do an event last spring about the soldiers who served from that town. And again, with the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, there are very handy books that tell you by town, by regiment, exactly who served. If you're looking for that for certain places for the revolution, you're not going to find it. You're not going to find it because of the way that people answered calls to serve and the way that things were organized, either with the Continental Army or outside of it. This is hyper-local campaigns and groups of soldiers trying to figure out if they're just all going to be traitors in a few years who will have bad consequences, or if there will ever be a republic. And for about a decade, nobody can answer that question. So we can't be mad that the records aren't perfectly organized. This is the story of Anna and Israel Aldrich. Anna and Israel married around the time of the Boston Tea Party and had children together during the first few years of the Revolution. Israel is typical of a place like Smithfield or Upton. He goes away and serves intermittently in short campaigns over and over about a 5 or 6 year period. Why does that make him typical? If you're not looking at a soldier who's part of George Washington's Continental Army, you're looking at sporadic answers to hyper-local calls to serve. Serving might look like, in Rhode Island, going to Providence or going to Aquidneck Island, defending something, sitting by a barracks for a period of time. Or it might mean that you are part of a regiment who's absorbed and you are fighting at Valley Forge. What we're finding in the Blackstone Valley is very few of those stories, and more stories of people like the Aldriches. When Anna is about 87 years old, she applies for a pension. Her husband had died years before, but she was owed something because of his service. She's interviewed by a judge named Benjamin Cowell from Providence, and she talks about her experience of being what they call a matron during the war. When Israel was away, Anna had to do what she talked about as her duties and his duties. They raised and fatted cows to be slaughtered for meat. She has to take care of all of the cows, and she paints a picture for Benjamin. She says she's doing his duties, haying, tending to all of the farm, and she has a baby, either strapped to herself or strapped to a tree. And she's trying to sing to the baby to calm it while taking care and fattening up these cows. If you know Rhode Island, where their farm is located is now the site of a very popular beef restaurant today. I mention this every talk because I think it is a fascinating echo. I also mention that because unless you absolutely know where to look, you're not going to find this gravestone. It's tucked away in a tiny quarter near the CVS headquarters warehouse. Very small, almost abandoned cemetery. You are not going to stumble across this history. You have to look for it. This is what that file actually looks like for Anna and Israel. We learn right away he's a drummer. That is part of his service that he is going away to do. You have to prove that you were married to be able to get that widow's pension. So there's quite a bit about their marriage in there. These would be tiny files. We could fit millions of them in this room if we had them because they are physically tiny, they're handwritten, and they're meant to be bound and stacked. If you've ever heard of red tape from the Civil War, it was an actual red instrument that was tied around that bled onto the documents. They literally tied them later in red tape. That's where that expression comes from. When these get put online, this is what they look like. And we have had tremendous luck with the people that we have worked with, where we told that story about the Aldriches and about the Beef Barn, which is the modern day restaurant, and literally someone went home and transcribed the whole document. It is now easier than it was before to tell their story. So now we have it in Benjamin Cowell's book, we have him on military rolls, and we have the story as Anna first told it for that pension file in the 1830s. We also came across stories when we were not trying to. We do a tour of a cemetery that has gravestones made out of something called cumberlandite. It's a very rare rock found in Rhode Island. And I was going through this cemetery, which is called Elder Ballou, and I said, I cannot talk about the Ballou family for an hour. I will find someone, people will laugh about this, who is not a Ballou. And I thought, well, this person looks pretty fascinating. Levi Tower, not a Ballou. I am on good track. So I write his name down. I go on Ancestry. Well, gosh darn it, his daughter marries a Ballou. She is the mother of the future Aidan Ballou, who creates Hopedale, not too far from where we are. But I got interested in this story because Aidan Ballou becomes a prominent pacifist or a Christian non-resistor in the 19th century. And I thought, well, what does he have to say about having a father who serves in the war and about having a maternal grandfather, this Levi Tower? He wrote 700 pages for his family genealogy, and it turns out he had very little to say about this. And that makes a lot of sense because his career is about not fighting. resisting the Civil War, resisting violence at all costs. He makes a remark that his father, Ariel, did face enemy combatants, but probably never fired off his gun. Maybe, who knows? We all tell stories that make us feel good. But the reason why I'm mentioning this is this stone doesn't make sense for when he died. I knew this stone wasn't 200 years old. So I did some research on how that stone got there. After the Civil War, there was a lot of controversy over who should be buried in official military burial grounds, government-run cemeteries. And because of the Confederate question, by 1929, there is a law passed which means that you can get a government-furnished stone and not be buried in a government cemetery. Someone applied on behalf of Levi Tower, and this was brought to the train station in Ashton, a village in Cumberland, and then dragged all the way out to this pretty remote burial ground to honor him, about 100 years after his passing. All of these records have also just been digitized within the past few years. This is what's called the Sons of the American Revolution application. Other people descended from him were happy to talk about his service, and they applied for membership in this organization. These are also great resources to cross-reference. Again, not transcribed, but you can learn a lot about someone's service record. I'll mention very briefly, a lot of people are drawn to learning about patriots because of groups like Sons of the American Revolution, or I think the more famous one, Daughters of the American Revolution. And as part of our work, we've tried to reach out to as many DAR chapters as we could. And in the course of that, I figured my family was here a while ago, see if I'm related to anyone who fought. So I'd always been taught that we didn't have anyone. It turns out we did. Turns out that when your generations are 19 years apart and everyone uses the same name, you miss an ancestor, which is what happened in my family tree. But it turns out I am descended from someone who fought. His name was Artemus Willard, and he lived in an area called Sterling, a large farmland, very similar to how Upton was structured back in the 18th century. This is the pension file of his widow, who also outlives him by quite a while. And I learned something I never would have known otherwise. The church where they were married dissolved. That happened a lot in the early 19th century, and people like Aidan Ballou were often at the heart of it. There was a split in the congregational community, and you get a lot of people establishing new churches or getting rid of older congregational groups. This is the rise of the Unitarians. Well, that happened where my ancestors lived, and no one had kept the records of their marriage. So all these years later, my ancestor Ruth is trying to prove that she married someone 65 years earlier. They finally dragged someone out who remembered them getting married, which is pretty cool. And that is what the record looks like on Library of Congress. I'll talk just a little bit about this case because what you do in these sessions really does matter. On the left is Benjamin Cowell. He's a judge, and he is connected through a number of people with members of Congress who are actually advocating for pensions, so for financial support for people who served in the revolution. You sometimes wonder, how does someone get into this? It helps when your father-in-law is running the congressional committee, so that does help. But Benjamin Cowell's father was a Minuteman, and he spent, insofar as we can tell, about 40 years studying the contributions of Revolutionary War soldiers, which makes our past year look like a picnic. And one of the people whose cases he studied really closely was James Brayton of North Smithfield, Rhode Island. James Brayton was a patriot of color, and this gravestone really surprised us because it's in a Quaker cemetery. And in spite of being a devout Quaker or a friend, typically they were also pacifists who did not participate in the war through military service. He has a flag and full military honor in this private cemetery. And one of the things why we looked so closely into this is if we just wanted numbers, we could look at records like this. Massachusetts has done a far better job of tabulating service people, their regiments, and their pensions. But when we actually read the Brayton pension file, we learned something interesting, which was that someone accused